I used to think Christmas meant safety. Not comfort exactly. My family never did comfort well, but safety. Predictability. The idea that no matter how the rest of the year went, Christmas was the one place where you were allowed to exist without defending yourself. I learned how wrong that was the year I showed up early. I'm a man in my early 30s, and for most of my life, I've been the odd piece in a well-polished machine. My family runs on titles, resumes, and dinner party shorthand. You're not asked how you're doing, you're evaluated, measured, quietly ranked. I never fit the mold, but I kept trying anyway. That's the part one don't judge myself for anymore. When you grow up inside a system, you assume the problem is you. That December, I drove up to my parents' place 3 days before Christmas. I told myself it was practical. Traffic would be lighter. I could help with preparations. Maybe, if I'm being honest, I hoped that showing initiative might finally buy me some peace. Their house sat exactly where it always had, perched behind iron gates and old trees like it had something to hide. White lights outlined every edge of the place, professional and perfect, like a real estate brochure come to life. Even the wreaths looked expensive. I parked my car, stepped out into the cold, and stood there for a moment with my overnight bag in one hand and a box of gifts in the other. Handmade gifts. Personal ones. I'd spent months on them. I should have taken that pause as a warning. The quiet before the door opens is sometimes mercy. Inside, the house smelled like pine and money. Fresh arrangements everywhere. New furniture where old memories used to sit. Nothing loud. Nothing accidental. The housekeeper greeted me warmly. She always did. She noticed things. That alone set her apart. Your mother and sister are in the kitchen, she said. No hug. No welcome home. Just directions. The kitchen looked like something designed to never actually be used. White marble. Stainless steel. A man in a chef's coat stood with a tablet, while my mother and sister leaned over it, discussing details that didn't matter. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting to be seen. Finally, my mother glanced up. Not surprised. Not pleased. Just accounting for me. You're early, she said. Your room isn't available. You'll be in the East Wing. Not your room. Not anymore. I nodded, said something polite, and mentioned I'd brought some samples of the gifts I'd made. She waved it off like smoke. Later, we're finalizing the menu. That was it. I took my things upstairs and sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the wall. I told myself to reset. This wasn't new. This was just how things were. But something felt off. A tension I couldn't place yet. I went looking for my father and brother. I figured if anyone in that house might acknowledge me without turning it into a quiet critique, it would be them. I stopped outside my father's study. The door was ajar. I heard my name. When someone says your name behind a door, your body reacts before your mind does. Your shoulders lock. Your breath changes. You don't lean in, you freeze. I stood there, unseen, listening to people who thought they were alone. My father's voice came first. Controlled. Certain. He needs to understand that this path isn't sustainable. My brother responded, confident as ever. That's why I brought Stephen in. Numbers speak louder than feelings. My sister laughed softly. Not cruel. Worse. Casual. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. They were planning something. Not a conversation. A presentation. A strategy. An intervention. At Christmas dinner, they talked about my life like it was a failed investment. About my work like it was a phase I should have grown out of. About my income, my apartment, my future. Things they only knew about because they'd bother to look them up, not because they'd ever asked me. Then my mother said the part that changed everything. While dinner is happening, she said calmly, we'll have the staff clear out his old bedroom. It's time. Clear it out. My childhood room. The last physical proof I'd ever belonged there. They laughed. Glasses clinked. Someone compared my work to macaroni art. Another joked about the clothes I wore last Thanksgiving, about how embarrassing it was. I stepped back slowly, every sound amplified in my head. My hands were shaking, but my mind was oddly clear. This wasn't concern. This was humiliation, carefully timed and publicly delivered. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to correct me, reduce me, bring me back in line, or remove me entirely. I went back to the guest room and locked the door. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and stared at the gifts I'd made. Each one had been designed with care. History, memory, None of it mattered. I didn't cry right away. I just felt hollow, like something finally snapped that had been bending for years. I left without saying goodbye. I took the back stairs, nodded to the housekeeper, muttered something about an emergency, and drove until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the wheel steady. At a rest stop, under fluorescent lights and fake Christmas music, I made one phone call to the one person who'd never treated my life like a disappointment. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said the truth plainly. They're not worried about you. They're worried about how you reflect on them. That was the moment the story shifted. Not with anger, with clarity. Because once you see what someone really thinks of you, you stop trying to earn what they were never going to give. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision. I wasn't going back. And Christmas was going to happen anyway, just not on their terms. I woke up the next morning in my own bed, in my own place, with that strange feeling you get when something heavy is gone, but the marks are still there. The apartment was quiet, honest quiet. No staff moving around. No murmured conversations behind closed doors. Just the hum of the radiator and the city breathing outside my window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was late to something I was already failing. I made coffee and stood there holding the mug, staring at the wall where I'd pinned sketches, invoices, half-finished ideas. This place wasn't impressive by my family's standards, but every inch of it was paid for by my hands and my decisions. No favors, no silent judgments attached. That mattered more than I'd ever admitted. My phone buzzed while the coffee cooled. My mother. I didn't answer. Another call followed. Then a text. Where are you? The caterer needs final numbers. Not are you okay? Not we're worried. Logistics. Image. Control. I set the phone face down and let it vibrate itself quiet. They were going to notice soon. Not just that I wasn't coming back, but that their carefully choreographed plan had lost its audience. That bothered people like them more than rejection ever could. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. There was an email I'd been avoiding for weeks. One of those messages you reread, not because you don't understand it, but because accepting it means admitting you're moving forward. A major retailer wanted to feature my work. Real volume, real money, real responsibility. I'd hesitated because growth meant visibility, and visibility meant questions. From my family, from people who like to decide whether your life was valid. That morning, the hesitation was gone. I wrote back a simple acceptance. Then I started planning Christmas. Not their Christmas, mine. I called the people who'd actually been there for me. The ones who'd shown up when there was nothing to gain from it. Friends who knew my work, my doubts, my history, and never tried to turn it into a correction. They didn't ask why I wasn't with my family. They just said, tell us where and when. That's how you tell the difference between obligation and loyalty. By the afternoon, the messages from my parents shifted tone. This isn't funny. You're being dramatic. Come back so we could talk like adults. Talk, right? I knew what that talk would be. Softened edges, concerned voices, reframing humiliation as love. They would never call it what it was. They'd just wait for me to apologize for reacting badly to it. I didn't respond. Instead, I arranged delivery. The gifts I'd made, the ones they dismissed without even looking at, I sent them anyway. Not as a peace offering, not as a plea, as a mirror. Each piece arrived with a short note. Calm, direct, polite. This was made with care. It represents what I do, whether you respect it or not. Enjoy it. I didn't sign them with apologies. Christmas Eve came quietly. Snow dusted the streets. My phone stayed silent longer than I expected. Then it rang. My mother. I answered this time. Where are you? She demanded, anger barely covering panic. I leaned back in my chair, coffee warm in my hands, and spoke evenly. Did you enjoy my gift? Silence. I could picture it. The moment the plan unraveled. The empty chair. The staff unsure what to do. The intervention with no subject. The cleared-out room that no longer mattered. You embarrassed us, she finally said. I almost laughed. Not out loud. Just inside. No, I said. You embarrassed yourselves. I just wasn't there to absorb it. She started on family. Tradition. Everything she thought she owned. I didn't argue. I just said, I heard everything. And ended the call. That night, surrounded by people who chose me without conditions, I felt something I hadn't felt at Christmas in a long time. Peace. Not because things were fixed, but because I finally stopped pretending they were mine to fix. The days after Christmas felt strange in a way I hadn't expected. Not empty, not lonely, clear. When you grow up in constant judgment, silence feels suspicious at first, like something's about to drop. I kept waiting for the familiar pull, guilt, obligation, the reflex to explain myself to people who were never listening. It didn't come. Instead, there was work to do. I threw myself into it, not as an escape, but because for the first time in a long while, the work felt honest again. No part of it was about proving anything. No part of it was about showing up with my hands open, asking to be chosen. Orders came in. Meetings got scheduled. Plans that had been sitting in my head for years finally had room to breathe. Funny thing, once I stopped trying to justify my life, it started moving faster. My parents didn't disappear quietly. They never do. The first attempt was subtle. A message from my father. Short, controlled, professional. We need to discuss some things. This isn't how family handles disagreements. I read it once, then again, then deleted it, because it wasn't a discussion they wanted. It was a correction. Then came the long email from my sister. Carefully worded, full of therapy language she'd picked up somewhere and weaponized. We're concerned about how you're processing things. Running away isn't healthy. I didn't reply, because walking away from disrespect isn't running. It's choosing. A week later, my mother tried a different angle. She showed up, unannounced. I was in the middle of a call when the buzzer went off. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. She stood there in a coat that cost more than my monthly rent, lips tight, eyes sharp. Not angry, calculating. I just want to talk, she said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. We stood there in the hallway like strangers. She started with disappointment, then moved to fear, then to the threat underneath it all. You're isolating yourself, she said. This isn't sustainable. I looked at her for a long moment. You said that about my work? I replied. About my life. About who I am. She flinched, just slightly. This is different. No, I said calmly. It's the same. She waited for me to soften, to apologize, to let her reframe the past into something easier to live with. I didn't. I'm not cutting you out, I said. But I'm done being corrected. Her face hardened. So what? We just pretend none of this happened. No, I said. We acknowledge it, and then we respect boundaries. She scoffed at the word like it was something trendy and temporary. I opened the door behind me. You can call, I added. You can ask how I'm doing, but you don't get to manage my life anymore. She left without hugging me. That hurt, but not like it used to, because this time I didn't shrink to follow her. That night, I sat alone with a drink and thought about something I'd avoided for years. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't come with speeches or fireworks. It shows up quietly the moment you stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. I slept better than I had in a decade. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. January came in quiet and cold, the way honest things usually do. No dramatic fallout. No public reconciliation. No sudden collapse of my life like everyone always warns you about when you stop playing your assigned role. Just days stacking on top of each other, steady and real. Work expanded fast once I stopped hesitating. The retailer deal turned into follow-up calls, then deadlines, then contracts that required me to think bigger than I ever had before. I hired help for the first time, not as a favor, not as charity, but because the demand was there and I respected the work enough to do it right. That felt good. Scary but good. I noticed something else too. My body was calmer. My shoulders weren't permanently tight. I wasn't bracing for criticism every time my phone buzzed. I didn't rehearse explanations in my head for choices I hadn't even made yet. That kind of peace sneaks up on you. My parents tried once more to regain footing. This time it came disguised as generosity. My father called, voice smooth, measured. Told me he'd spoken to a contact who might be interested in investing in my work. Said it could give me structure and guidance. I thanked him and declined. There was a pause. A sharp inhale he thought I wouldn't hear. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. No, I replied evenly. I'm just not making it easier for you. That was the last business-related conversation we ever had. After that, the distance settled into something stable. Not warm, not hostile, just clear. And clarity is underrated. One evening, a few weeks later, I found myself cleaning the studio space late at night. Orders shipped, tools lined up, quiet music playing low. I caught my reflection in the darkened window and barely recognized the man looking back. Not because he looked different, because he looked settled. I thought about the version of myself that would have been sitting at that Christmas table, waiting to be corrected, apologizing for taking up space, shrinking just enough to keep the peace. That man felt far away. What surprised me most wasn't the relief. It was the grief. Not for the family I had, but for the family I kept hoping they'd become. Letting go of that fantasy hurt more than any argument ever had. But once it was gone, there was room for something else. Choice. I started building traditions that didn't require permission. Sunday dinners with friends. Long walks without checking my phone. Saying no without explaining. And slowly, the question stopped being, why don't they accept me? It became, why did I ever need them to? That answer didn't come all at once. But every day I lived without bending, it got clearer. By February, the silence had weight to it. Not the suffocating kind. The honest kind. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts without them bouncing off someone else's expectations. I didn't miss my family the way I thought I would. That surprised me. I missed an idea of them. The version that might have existed if pride hadn't been their native language. But the people themselves, the constant assessment, the quiet disapproval dressed up as concern, that absence felt more like setting something down than losing it. Work kept moving, not in a frantic way, not the desperate sprint I used to run whenever I felt judged. This was different, intentional. I chose which orders to take. I turned some down. For the first time, I wasn't afraid that saying no would make everything disappear. It didn't. In fact, the opposite happened. The more selective I became, the more solid things felt. Clients respected clarity. So did partners. Turns out boundaries don't scare the right people off. They filter. One afternoon, while reviewing numbers, I caught myself smiling at a spreadsheet. That would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Back then, numbers were weapons my family used against me. Proof I was falling short. Now, they were just information. Tools. Nothing personal. That shift mattered more than I expected. I ran into my sister by accident one evening. Same grocery store. Same aisle. She froze when she saw me, like she hadn't expected me to exist outside the family context. We exchanged polite words. Weather-level conversation. She glanced at my cart. Simple things, nothing impressive, and I could feel the old instinct rising. The urge to justify, to explain how well I was doing. I didn't. When she asked, "So, how's everything going?" I answered honestly. "Good," I said. "Busy. Peaceful." She nodded, unsure what to do with that. There was nothing to critique, nothing to fix. We parted awkwardly. I walked to my car lighter than I'd gone in. That night, I thought about how much of my life I'd spent carrying things that weren't mine. Expectations, disappointments, unspoken contracts I'd never agreed to, but always tried to honor. I'd mistaken endurance for loyalty. Turns out, loyalty to yourself feels different, quieter, less dramatic, but it holds. There were moments, late at night, when doubt crept in. Not loud doubt, just a whisper. What if they're right? What if this only works because you walked away? I let the thought pass. Because I finally understood something simple. Walking away didn't make my life work. It revealed that it already did. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was choosing, and that changed the weight of everything. March brought longer days and an unexpected test. It came quietly, the way real tests usually do. No confrontation, no raised voices, just a message that sat on my phone longer than it should have. It was from my father. Not an argument, not a demand, an update. A distant relative had been hospitalized. Nothing critical, he said. Just thought I should know. There it was, the familiar hook. Shared history. Obligation dressed as information. The unspoken question. Will this pull you back in? I stared at the screen for a while before responding. Thanks for letting me know. I hope they recover well. That was it. No follow-up. No opening. No invitation for the conversation to drift back into control. I felt a flicker of something then. Not guilt. Not anger. Pride. Because a year earlier, that message would have unraveled me. I would have driven up, shown my face, slipped back into the role without anyone asking me to. I would have confused proximity with responsibility. Now, I stayed where I was, and nothing bad happened. That realization settled deep. A few weeks later, I ran into my mother, truly by accident this time. Sidewalk cafe, early afternoon. She was with a friend, mid-conversation, and didn't see me until I was already passing by. She called my name. I stopped, turned. She stood, hesitated, then hugged me. Brief, careful, like she wasn't sure what version of me she was allowed to touch. "You look well," she said. "So do you," I replied. We talked for a few minutes. Neutral ground, weather, work in vague terms. Her friend excused herself, sensing something private. My mother studied me then. Really looked. "You seem different," she said. "I am," I answered. She waited, maybe for an explanation, maybe for reassurance that this difference wasn't permanent. I didn't give her either. "I'm happy," I added, not to prove anything, just as a fact. She nodded slowly, like someone adjusting to new information they hadn't planned for. "I'm glad," she said. And for once, I believe she meant it, at least as much as she was capable of. We parted without tension, without promises. I walked away steady. That night, I realized something important. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means no longer needing the outcome to change. I wasn't waiting for them to understand me anymore. I understood myself, and that turned every interaction, from family to strangers, lighter, less loaded, honest. I stopped rehearsing conversations that might never happen. I stopped wondering how things should have been, because the life I was living now wasn't a reaction anymore. It was mine. By spring, my life no longer felt like a response. That was the real change. For years, everything I did had been shaped by opposition, by the need to justify, to explain, to stand up straight under someone else's measuring tape. Even my rebellion had been reactive, loud in places, defensive in others. Now there was none of that, just direction. The work reached a point where I had to step back and acknowledge it wasn't fragile anymore. Systems were in place. People depended on me, not emotionally, not conditionally, but professionally. That kind of dependence doesn't suffocate. It steadies. I started mentoring someone younger, not because I wanted to be seen as successful, but because I remembered what it felt like to build something while everyone waited for you to fail. I didn't give speeches. I didn't preach. I just showed up. Funny thing, support feels different when it's given freely instead of demanded. My family faded further in the background, not because I pushed them away, but because they no longer occupied the center of my thoughts. They became what they always should have been, people in my life, not the judges of it. My father sent a short message once. No subtext, no correction. Proud of your persistence. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't nothing. I read it, felt whatever needed to be felt, and let it sit where it belonged, without building a future on it. That was the test I passed without trying. One evening, sitting on my balcony as the city cooled down, I thought about what success actually looked like now. Not recognition, not validation, just alignment. My days matched my values. My nights were quiet. My decisions didn't need an audience. I hadn't won anything over anyone. I had simply stopped losing myself. That kind of victory doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require witnesses. It doesn't need to be explained at holidays or defended at tables built for judgment. It just holds. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Summer arrived without ceremony. No milestone. No dramatic turning point. Just warmth settling into places that used to stay tense. That's how I knew things had truly changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval. Not for acknowledgement. Not for someone to finally say, "You were right all along." That kind of waiting keeps you tied to people who don't know how to let go of control. My life had grown roots while no one was watching. The work stabilized into something sustainable, not just financially, but mentally. I wasn't grinding to prove worth. I wasn't chasing growth for the sake of optics. I chose projects that fit. I walked away from ones that didn't. The fear that used to live in every decision, what if this is the wrong move, had gone quiet. Confidence, I learned, isn't loud. It's the absence of panic. I hosted a small gathering one evening. Nothing fancy. A few people I trusted. Food made at home. Laughter that didn't feel performative. No one asked what my plans were 5 years from now. No one evaluated my choices against some invisible standard. They just showed up. At one point, I stepped away to the balcony and looked back through the window. The scene hit me harder than I expected. This was family. Not by blood. Not by obligation. By alignment. I thought about my parents then. Not with bitterness. Not even with sadness. Just clarity. They had given me many things. Discipline. Drive. A sense of responsibility. But they had never learned how to offer acceptance without conditions. That wasn't my failure. And it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I still spoke to them occasionally. Short calls. Neutral updates. Mutual respect at arm's length. That distance wasn't punishment. It was maintenance. Like keeping a machine running by not forcing parts that don't fit. They stopped trying to change me once they realized I wasn't negotiating. That's the truth no one tells you. Boundaries don't provoke the right people. They educate them. And if they don't learn, the boundary still holds. One night, lying in bed, I realized something simple and final. I had become a man I needed back when I was younger. Not louder. Not richer. Not more impressive. Just steady. Someone who doesn't disappear under pressure. Someone who walks away when respect is missing. Someone who knows that peace is not something you earn by enduring discomfort. It's something you choose by leaving it behind. My life doesn't look like what my family imagined. It looks better, because it's mine, and that's the ending they never planned for. But it's the one I live every day.